Associate Professor of Data and Society at Arizona State University, Alexander Halavais. Alexander, welcome to the program. Okay, just give us a few of your predictions for the next 12 months, or go further if you like, but don't go too far. We need to be able to imagine what you're telling us.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far because that's always a dangerous ploy. I think that you've hit on some of these. That it is both an opportunity, a kind of gold rush towards things like the metaverse that have been in the works for 2 decades and even have had some initial forays into that area. But certainly that seems like an area that is ripe for heavy investment right now. But I think you've also touched on one of the major reasons for this, which is not just seeing a new economic opportunity, but also being deeply concerned about capturing an audience. That the number of companies that control, the number of platforms that control information flows around the world have gotten smaller and smaller over time, and that makes them very concerned about consolidating that audience and that control.
Alexander, how are things like the metaverse and whatever succeeds the smartphone, the new smart devices that are coming, how are they going to change human behavior?
So we've already seen some of this, which is a bit of balkanization, people talking to people they already know, a heavier dependence, as I said, on platforms. So our sociality now requires us to be in places that are often owned or state controlled. And so we have a new intermediary between us. That is concerning for a number of reasons. One of the reasons that Facebook is on its heels right now is that that level of control has allowed them to manipulate the emotions of people on their platform. They're aware of this, and it is part of their business model. They are ultimately an advertising company, as is Google. That is where their revenues come from. And so there is a new player in social interaction, which is these large companies that seek to extract profits from our social connections. What that means is a rapidly shifting way in which we interact with a hidden manipulator. And I know that during the pandemic, especially, we've become even more reliant on this. I have two young children, grade school children, who interact almost entirely online at this point, and that has had, I think, a significant impact on their sociality.
And what about technology's ability to be able to tackle the biggest issues that we face? And the climate crisis is the thing that really comes to mind. Is it a question of the individual user taking advantage of the technology to be able to make a personal contribution, or is it also a role that the big tech companies themselves can play in the technology helping to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, it'd be great if they could do that. But there isn't any clear economic incentive for them to do that. And there isn't necessarily a way that we can leverage those companies in the way we might like to. So there's a definite power struggle between the user and the platforms at this point. There was a time on the internet when it seemed like it was a democratic process. When we had mainstream media consolidating with various small numbers of sources of news, but we had individuals hosting their own sites, hosting their own interactions, and that has changed. So right now, I think that this does fall into the hands of individuals, and frankly, their choice may not be to leverage existing platforms, but to move away from them. And my hope is, and there are others who hope this as well, that as we move away from Facebook and Microsoft, we can find new open standards for things like the metaverse.
Alexander, just finally, it may well have been a generational issue, the use of tech. So my father-in-law, for example, and my dad, indeed, my dad is in his mid-80s. He only uses his iPad to read international news. He's obsessed with it. My father-in-law uses his smartphone just to answer emergency calls. But my kids, they can't live without their phones, of course. Are we going to get to the stage, or are we already there, that human beings will have no choice but to use this kind of tech, whether it's the big tech and driverless cars or whether it's the small tech and handheld devices?
I suspect we're mostly already there. It depends on where you are, of course, globally, as well as in terms of where you are in the economic and social strata. But I suspect that there is definitely a force towards these things. And it's worth remembering that something like a physical newspaper is still a technology. That technology has evolved. But we are both, in terms of the technology itself and the expectation that you have something like a cell phone that you can use, and the social expectation of being able to be connected to the people around you. I think that we we are drawn into this, even those who would rather not be, into this kind of embrace. And my hope is, again, that that embrace is not just a small number of companies that provide it for us.
Really interesting to hear your thoughts, Alexander. Thank you so much indeed. Alexander Halavey speaking to us from the United States.